I was in the car with Srila Prabhupada after an engagement in Boston, because I was pregnant, so I got to ride in the car with Srila Prabhupada. And I asked Srila Prabhupada, I said, Srila Prabhupada, did Balaram dance with the gopis too? And Srila Prabhupada said, Balaram had his own gopis.
But I was only able to cook for 3 days because I ended up having a health issue. And Srila Prabhupada had a sign in the kitchen, and it said, number 1, chanting is number 2, service is number 3, and then comes reading in that order. And that he had made up. It was handwritten by Srila Prabhupada, and he had that made up when Jadharani had come to visit. And she was chanting and chanting and chanting, and hadn't been taking care of her health and working really, really hard. And Srila Prabhupada made a point, and he handwrote exactly what importance, in what order of importance we were to take life seriously, because we were so young and we didn't know anything except what Srila Prabhupada taught us.
One time I had the opportunity to chant while Prabhupada was present in a kirtan. Sometimes he would have devotees chanting kirtan rather than him doing it in the early days. So I was chosen, I was able to chant, and I was always trying to be humble in whatever way I thought was humble. And so when I was leading, I was chanting not very loudly, and in order to put myself forward as some great kirtan leader. And Prabhupada shouted at me, said, "Chant loudly." So we've learned over the years that, and Prabhupada would say very clearly that boldly preaching was an act of humility, because it was the positive portion of humility, that if you preached loudly, then of humility.
When I was in New Vrindavan, from New York, I went to New Vrindavan, and I'd hitchhiked there and got there very late, and we're doing work, getting ready for Prabhupada arrival. We built a sort of a cupola on the attic room where he was to stay, and it's there to this very minute. Every time I go to New Vrindavan, I look at it. And I did all this sort of work there, and we were all working together. It was very difficult. There was no running water. There was no indoor plumbing. Kirtananda Maharaj in those days was taking the word austerity. We had to hike 2 miles. We parked the car and then hiked 2 miles up a dirt road in the mud, in the winter, in the snow, bringing food and stuff. And one time I saw Kirtananda Maharaj. He had polio, so he would stagger with a cane with so many roses that you could not see him. We had no food. He came up with so many roses that you could not see, long-stemmed red roses. All you saw were these roses staggering up with, apparently the roses had a cane, all the way up the road. And when he got there, we were all sitting there starving, wondering why on earth he bought all those roses. And he pointed out he had gone to a greenhouse and told them about the temple, and they donated these roses, which were too in the flower shops. So he had all these roses, and I remember the tiny deities. He was sitting there taking these gigantic roses and turning them into tiny little petal garlands this size for the deities. But anyhow, that's the sort of mood it was, both beautiful spiritual life and also very cranky atmosphere. A lot of people from Mott Street were there. A lot of former heroin addicts and gay people and whatnot were in that place. So it was a very edgy atmosphere. So when Srila Prabhupada came there, he came into a midst of a bunch of people that were essentially squabbling. Every time they squabbled, they'd run upstairs and make their case in front of Srila Prabhupada as though he were the King Solomon, running up and saying, but he said that, he did that, and Prabhupada would patiently try to put out the fire, and then the other guy would run up the stairs. So Prabhupada was pretty disgusted with all of that. One day Bhagavan came, and to me Bhagavan was just like the epitome of this positive-minded, energetic guy. And he and I hit it off immediately. We just liked each other immediately. And we went on to have interesting things to do in Detroit together and building up the Detroit Temple. So he showed up, and as far as I was concerned, he was there. He got married to Krishna Bhamani. He took initiation on the same day as his marriage. to me, he was just the epitome of what is right about ISKCON, and he wasn't sniveling and whining or fighting or anything. So anyhow, Prabhupada came down the stairs one morning, and Bhagavan and I were there, and we saw each other. We grinned from each other, we ran over each other, and gave each other a huge, we're both very husky guys, we gave each other huge manly embraces, you know. We were embracing and just practically dancing in ecstasy. We were so happy about our Krishna consciousness and being there with Prabhupada. And we didn't see Prabhupada coming down the stairs. And Prabhupada came and he said, yes, he said, you should be in embracing mood, not in fighting mood. And from that became another key thing in my sense is whatever we're fighting about is very, very minor compared to what we have together. Prabhupada made it so clear to us that perfect or imperfect, we need to work together and spread Krishna consciousness. It's not us and them ever. There is no us, there is no them. It's just spirit souls and Krishna's lotus feet. And that's what I got from that statement. He was very pleased to see us embracing, and I was very glad to please him in that way. And so was Bhagavan.
After a couple of days, I had the opportunity to go on a morning walk with Srila Prabhupada to the beach. And of course, there were a lot of devotees, and me, I was just an insignificant little devotee. Get very close to Srila Prabhupada. The ones right next to Srila Prabhupada were sannyasis, you know, big devotees. I was one of the ones at the very end. And Prabhupada was talking and I couldn't hear what he was saying. So I kept going like this, you know, making this kind of like, you know, trying to focus on what he was saying. And I kept jumping from one side to the other, trying to grasp a word from Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada happened to notice that. And when we got back to the temple, Prabhupada was giving the Bhagavatam class, and that particular morning, I was sitting right in front of Srila Prabhupada, just a few feet away, maybe 4 or 5 feet away from Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada started talking about the importance of hearing. I don't remember the date, but I know that that lecture is there in the archives, where Prabhupada is talking. It's a lecture in Los Angeles, where Prabhupada is talking about how a dog, Prabhupada said, he sees with his nose. The karmis, they see with their eyes, Prabhupada said. But a devotee, he sees with his ears. He said, hearing is so important. He said that is the beginning of devotional life. Shravanam. He said, our eyes will not protect us all the while. If we are asleep, our eyes are closed, and someone comes to try and do some harm to us, our eyes will not help us, will not protect us. But our ears are always attentive. He says, if someone comes to try to do some harm to us when we are asleep, our ears will tell us, wake up, wake up. Prabhupada went like this. And will tell us that someone is coming to. And the whole time Prabhupada was talking up, he went on describing the importance of hearing. And the whole time Prabhupada was talking about this, he kept looking at me. And I truly felt that Prabhupada was talking to me as if saying, this is for you to understand, you know, that you should do something about your hearing. He probably remembered what happened while I was in his room, and he probably saw me, you know, jumping, trying to hear. So I don't know, I just felt that he was talking. After that, I went and tried to get a hearing aid, which I couldn't get, of course. That's another story. But yeah, that was very, very important to me.
When I first saw Prabhupada in New York City, and I saw him come in, whether he came down from, you know, upstairs and he sat down on the Vyasasan, and he exuded this humility. I can't say it any other way. I'd never met anyone else like him, yet he knew everything. He was so knowledgeable. He spoke about, you know, about our relationship with God, about Krishna, about this material world not being our home. Whereas all the other gurus I'd been to see seemed to want to impress me that they were almost like Jesus, you know, it says, I am the way, I am the light, I am the... And some of them had some pretty powerful energy. Guru Maharaji was my friend, was becoming his disciple, and took me to see him, and he just touched me here. I felt like someone had like hit me with a light stick or something from Star Wars. I mean, seriously. I mean, so he obviously had some Shakti, some energy like that, but I'd met so many of these gurus, and it just made me feel anything. And when I saw him, it was like, when I saw Srila Prabhupada, it was like I finally met my guru. I knew as soon as I saw him, I knew I'd met my guru. And I came back and I started to study his books, and the first few Srimad Bhagavatams were available at that time. And I realized at that time that somehow my life has taken a big turn. That there was no way from this point that I could be peripheral anymore. Because I read Alan Watts, and I used Das. I was, you know, to Richard Alpert, and before it became Baba Das. But it was all really, as Prabhupada would have said, for sense gratification. Then when I met him, Srila Prabhupada impressed me so much that actually spiritual life is something very serious, and at the same time is something very sweet.
So in Boston, 1968, we were in Srila Prabhupada's quarters. Srila Prabhupada had renamed the street Hare Krishna Street. And there were many devotees there, Himavati Dasi and Hamsavatar Das. I was there, many devotees were there. And Himavati had just made Srila Prabhupada a nice bead bag and given it to him. And Hamsavatar had his beads around his neck because he had just washed his bead bag and it was drying. So Srila Prabhupada was trying to give Hamsavatar this bead bag. And Hamsavatar said, no, Srila Prabhupada, that's yours. And Srila Prabhupada says, what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine. Everything belongs to Krishna. So even this beautiful new bead bag, he was unattached. He just wanted to immediately give it to Hamsavatar. Very nice.
I was involved in the first Tulsi planting and distributing Tulsi. And once we got all the Tulsis, you know, being sent out to all of the temples, ask about Kusha grass, because I'd been hearing in the scriptures, and I was really interested in plants. Before I was a devotee, I was a gardener, and I'd fertilized the mango trees at the temple, and they gave fruit for the first time in 10 years. So they knew I was really into gardening and everything like that, and I was really interested in Kusha grass. So it was so amazing when my name came in, Kusha Devi Dasi. It was like a big miracle for me, because Srila Prabhupada was in India at the time, and how could he know where my head was at? How could I have told him? And so I really felt the confirmation that Srila Prabhupada knew what was going on in our minds at all times. He knew where our consciousness was. My name was Dana, so I was expecting some kind of a Dina, some kind of a name with D, because that's usually how it was, that if whatever your name began with, your devotee name began with that letter. And I also had all these desires. I wanted it to be simple and short. You know, I had all these conditions about the way I wanted my name to sound. I didn't want it to sound odd to the Western ear. And then beautiful, sweet, little short name, Kusha. And it was just like Srila Prabhupada knew all the different little conditions of my mind. And he had handwritten my Karmi name on a piece of paper, and it was stapled to the beads. And the beads were in a thread box sent from India, and I was just so mystified by every little thing, all the little details of everything, and how he answered my letter so sweetly. And it was just such a wonderful experience, you know, such a faith-enlivening experience.
One time I was in the temple room, it was after Prasadam. In the early days, devotees would take Prasadam, the Prasadam would be cooked upstairs in Prabhupada's apartment and brought downstairs, and devotees would eat in the temple. We had these grass mats that we'd lay out, and plates was a really cacophony of plates that were gotten at thrift stores and so on. They were porcelain plates, nothing matched. And so the plate afterwards. So I was in the temple, and the plates were all in the sink. And in the temple, this was a storefront that was opened up, and in the back there was a little bathroom and outside a little sink, and the plates were all piled up there, and the plates were not washed. And I was in the temple alone. I might have been chanting japa or reading, I don't remember, I just happened to be there, and who comes in? Prabhupada walks in and offered my obeisances. And then he saw in the sink all these dishes. Why are these dishes done? And of course I was left standing. I didn't know what to say, but he said, well, if no one's going to do it, then I'll do it. Well, naturally, of course, I got with the program. But Prabhupada was prepared to do that, just wash the dishes.
After the ISKCON press moved up to Boston, Srila Prabhupada came to visit, and he was going to be given a tour of the press. So we opened the door to where the press room was on the first floor, which consisted of a folding machine and some other large machines. And Srila Prabhupada walked in the doorway and then just stopped. He said, Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paripachakacharya Astutera Satashi Shima Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Prabhupada Ki Jai. My Guru Maharaj would be very pleased. And of course, we've been working for a long time to build the press and follow Srila Prabhupada's instructions so that he was pleased and that his Guru Maharaj was pleased with everything that we wanted. Then he kept looking around the press, and the devotees were wearing dhotis, and he said, no, you should wear pants. Did not have dhotis around. And he said the press should shine like glass, and then it will run properly. He said, I have experience with this with my dictaphone. If I keep it clean, it runs properly. It runs very nicely.
Another very interesting incident that happened in Mexico, this one devotee, Hanuman Prabhu, he had been a sannyasi who Prabhupada had sent to Argentina to preach. Unfortunately, in the course of his preaching, he had fallen down from the sannyas order and married a girl. I think that was probably the first time that a sannyasi had fallen down, or one of the first times. So it was very, very grave thing that happened. And when he came to see Srila Prabhupada, he was very shy to come in front of Srila Prabhupada. He was a little afraid. And when he finally came to see Srila Prabhupada, he told Prabhupada, he said, Srila Prabhupada, said, Lord Chaitanya rejected Chota Haridas because he glanced at in a lustful way. He said, so I'm just afraid that perhaps because I also lusted at a woman, perhaps you're going to reject me, Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada looked at him and he said, Lord Chaitanya is God. He can spread this movement in a moment, if he wishes, without the help of anybody. He said, but I am just a servant of God, and I need all the help that I can get. He said, you have rendered so much, how can I reject you? So that was very sweet, very touching to see how Prabhupada was so merciful to all of his devotees.
This is one of the qualities of forgiveness of Srila Prabhupada. That Kirtananda had been absent for some time, but when he came back, there was a fire sacrifice just concluded, and when Kirtananda came in, Srila Prabhupada had someone get a pillow for him, and then he had someone go upstairs and get a Brahmin thread from his bag. It might have even been one of Srila Prabhupada's old Brahmin threads, I'm not sure. And he gave Hayagriva Brahmin initiation without any previous notification that he was going to do that. So even though these devotees had been gone and had been saying some not very pleasant things, as soon as they came back, Srila Prabhupada immediately just accepted them back.
There was one incident that I remember, because we had had non-Brahmins doing the worship. And Gaurasinder, because Srila Prabhupada, his health had been fragile, he hadn't wanted to tax Srila Prabhupada with asking for more initiations. So there were only a few Brahmins in the, and we ladies had been doing the artiks and whatnot. Tiridas did Mongol artik. And here we were at a situation where we realized we don't have the Brahmins. And so we phoned to Waimanalo to ask Srila Prabhupada if it was okay if first initiates did the artik. I was a first initiate, and Srila Prabhupada yelled, "No, they must be Brahmin." We could hear through the phone. When your spiritual master yells, very seriously, you don't forget it. That's one of the beautiful things when you hear the spiritual master yell. It's ingrained. It's like it's engraved in your heart, and it becomes a sweet thing eventually, and it becomes wonderful because you never forget it. Some of the other things you might forget, like at the time we were also making sprouts for Srila Prabhupada, and he said, make sure you get each and every sprout. Don't leave any one of them out. There's a spirit soul in every single one of them. So we took that very seriously. It was just amazing how merciful Srila Prabhupada was to a little sprout, making sure that they all get equal opportunity to get offered to the Lord. How compassionate is our Guru. He's that compassionate.
Yet first Srila Prabhupada didn't want, to my understanding, that he didn't want to give girls Gayatri Mantra. In India, I believe girls didn't get Gayatri Mantra, but one very outspoken woman, Madhavi Lata Dasi, insisted that the women, especially her, be given Gayatri Mantra. Well, Srila Prabhupada gave the women Gayatri Mantra, which is good because so many women do Pujari work, which is also something that Srila Prabhupada allowed it in America.
It was at the same time in 1968, about December or so, and that was the time of my birthday. I reached my 25th birthday. I had decided to kill myself on my 25th birthday if I hadn't found the purpose of life. Fortunately, I found it 3 months early than 25th birthday, and 3 months later, I was in New York for my birthday, and everything was going haywire. I was used to the California gung-ho devotees. In there, it was very miserable, not because they were not nice, it's just because they were New Yorkers. You know, they were just used to being miserable and uptight and indoors. In California, if they get uptight, they go out. It's good weather. So I wasn't used to this at all, and Prabhupada was spending a lot of time there. When I first walked in, I blew my chance of a good welcome by saying, "Oh, everyone looks so sad. I guess it's because Srila Prabhupada hasn't been here in a while." And that, of course, didn't start me off on the right foot. But anyhow, as things went on, I was struggling every inch of the way. People were constantly finding mean psychological means of getting at me while I was doing my work. And I just didn't realize it was just an East Coast thing where people spend their winters indoor with each other. They're more psychological, whereas in the West Coast, people are more physical, like, sand between the toes sort of life instead of head trips sort of life. And I was there, and so one thing after another happened. One of the person that later became a prominent sannyasi took the bases from the Radha Krishna deities. He was so tired of me taking such a long time to build the altar that he stole the bases of that he wanted to take the deities and put them on the unfinished altar. So to counteract that, I took the bases from the deities and put them in my tool bag. But he was so angry at me for taking so long that he took the tool bag, which contained the bases for the deity, and threw it in the dumpster, which was then hauled away. So actually, we had no bases for the deities in New York. Have no bases. They slid in. So this was what was going on like that. It was really driving me nuts. So when Srila Prabhupada finally arrived, and we went up to his quarters behind 21 2nd Avenue, Matchless Gifts, he had a nice apartment where Pradumna was sort of holding the fort. We came in, it was completely packed with people. Prabhupada was in a room, and he was talking to people. At that point, he started what became a big tradition with him, which was, "Where's Naranarayan?" And then he would say, "I'm here, Srila Prabhupada. Naranarayan is everything is all right? And I, from that point onward, always said, oh yes, Srila Prabhupada. At that particular occasion, the first time he said it, he was talking about various people, senior, like Brahmana. He said, where's Narayan? And he said, right here, Srila Prabhupada. I was sort of at the back of the room. Not that I was saying much because it was a New York room. It wasn't that big, but there were so many people in it. I said, right here, Srila Prabhupada. He said, Narayan, everything is all right? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada. I said, but I wanted him to know that things had been going badly for me. I said, Krishna's very kind. And Prabhupada is smiling at me and nodding like that when I say, yes, Srila Prabhupada. As soon as I said, Krishna is very kind, he looked at me like that, totally intensely, like a person suddenly seeing money, a broken treasure in a museum or a stolen painting in a gallery. He looked at me, he looked at me sharply and he said, Krishna is always kind. And I was shocked to the core because I was thinking he was going to take my side and rectify things for me. Then he said, Krishna is always kind. And it hit me just like a baseball bat over the head that whatever I experienced was a teaching for me to learn, and not that I should expect an easy ride or that my godbrother should be nice just because they're Krishna conscious too. And from that point onward, every time I went to any temple in the world where Srila Prabhupada was, he would start, the first thing he would say, where is Narayan? It didn't matter who else was present. He said, first, where is Narayan? I said, here, Srila Prabhupada. He said, everything, Narayan, everything is all right? I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada.
We had a terrible car accident shortly after. We weren't there very long. And luckily, I had a 1954 Ford, which, as you would remember, they're like tanks. So we got in this accident in Honolulu, downtown, and the other car, they were destroyed. We all lived because the car was like this. And I remember Shuddha and I were out there. We were at Doty's, and we're out in the because, with the car spun around, we got thrown out into the street, and we had just come from the market. We're thinking everything's $1. I mean, this is what, 1975 or something, and we're in the street. I remember Shuddha thinking, oh, pick the papayas up, they were $1. So, but afterwards, when we came to see Prabhupada, Prabhupada was so compassionate. We wanted to know how we fared, how we were, from it. And actually, both of us have bad backs to this day from this. But as the weeks went on, I couldn't keep up the Pujari service. I was actually doing everything, which was very difficult. I'm a neophyte, difficult for me. And finally, I just couldn't do it. My back, I couldn't stand, I couldn't walk, I was crawling. And so I told Shuddha, I really need to speak to Srila Prabhupada because I can't do this. I mean, I just can't. I have to recuperate. I'll never walk again, the doctor said, if I don't do something. So the word got out that I was going to say I have to leave. Well, before I came up to the room to see Srila Prabhupada and tell him, because I really couldn't continue, I would probably had to just disappear. I would have had, because I just couldn't continue with the service. And, Guru Kripa, those that would remember him back at that time, they were very, very strict, as far as what, you have to do this and that's that, and you die doing it, whatever. And they expected me, as in the illustrious Guru Kripa, who I love him. I gotta say, I love Guru Kripa, but in his illustrious words, Prabhupada, I'm gonna give you the sauce. Right? He would talk like that, exactly like that. And say, Prabhupada's going to talk, he'll tell you where it's at. He had that like gangster talk to him, almost endeared you to him in some ways. But that's what, So he was there, sort of that little smirk on his face. Prabhupada's going to give it to Hamsavatar now. And Prabhupada just smiled. But of course, Prabhupada knew everything. He knew everything. So he just smiled and he looked right at Guru Kripa and then back at me. Just like that. And said, so, what is the difficulty? The sannyasis are traveling. Yeah. His son said, travel. He said, worship the deities at home. He said, follow the regulative principles, chant 16 rounds. So, what is the difficulty? So, it meant a lot. So he was teaching me a lesson. At the same time, I'm sure he was teaching our dear godbrother Guru Kripa also a lesson, Maybe if he wasn't going to be so hard on me, maybe Guru Kripa shouldn't either.
So after the installation of the Radhakrishna deities, first Radhakrishna deities in America, which was New York, 1968, Srila Prabhupada was sitting on the Vyasasana and all the devotees were sitting in rows in front of him. And he was eating a popper and he broke the popper. And then he looked at all the devotees and he said, all glories to the preparer of prasadam, all glories to the provider of prasadam, and all glories to the eater of prasadam. And then at that installation, also marrying some devotees and initiating some devotees. And we were supposed to always keep our hair braided at that time, but I didn't know that, so I came in with my hair down, just flowing down, and instead of chastising me, Srila Prabhupada said, "Oh, Balai, you were looking like the goddess of fortune." That was really nice. And at that installation also, there were several garlands that we had that were supposed to be for the wedding party in Srila Prabhupada, but before we could even put them on the people, Srila Prabhupada instructed that they be put on the disciplic succession pictures on the altar.
I owe my parents, or at least, get into arguments with my parents, especially my father. My mother didn't like to argue. My father was a real debater. He was really into politics, and so he just loved a good debate. But I remember as a child lying in bed and in the dark, and then thinking what it was like to die, and imagining myself in a coffin, sitting, thinking that there I was dead, and I got so scared. It was so frightening. So I guess so always of somewhere in my psyche about being afraid of death, and probably that helped me to come to Krishna consciousness eventually. But I used that on my parents, my mother. I said, trying to, aren't you afraid of death? And my mother said, no, I'm not afraid of dying. So that really confused me. How could anybody admit that they weren't afraid of dying? So one lecture, after the lecture, and it had nothing, this question I wanted to ask Prabhupada had nothing to do with the lecture. I said, I think maybe Prabhupada might have been speaking about death and fear of death. And so I said, Prabhupada, my mother, I asked my mother about that, she said, no, that she's not afraid of death. And he said, they may say they're not afraid of death, but you give somebody a gun and say, okay, go ahead. But so actually, it's easy to say, but actually everyone is afraid of death. Even in my mother's later years, and she was actually very receptive to Krishna consciousness, very favorable. But still, in her later years, she any problem, she was always fearful, and even she would express a lot of times going on a plane, that she's so afraid. So really, when you get down to it, everyone is afraid of dying.
Then I got to go on morning walks with Srila Prabhupada. And I remember there was one time we used to walk at this park called Chapultepec Park, which is right next to the temple in Mexico City. And there were some people there practicing martial arts. And so Prabhupada stopped to look at them. It was early in the morning. And Prabhupada turned to all of us, and he said, just see, he says, whenever we talk about death, all these karmi people, they always say that they're not afraid of death. So Prabhupada said, so I say to them, if they are not afraid of death, then why are they doing this? Hoo! And Prabhupada just went like this. And it's difficult for me to imitate Prabhupada, of course, but it was very funny the way he did it. And of course, all the devotees started more.
Bhagaji was telling all these beautiful stories and telling about bedding with Srila Prabhupada. And he was telling us about how Vrindavan was so special. And he said the fish in the Jamuna River, they'll be swimming along, and as soon as they feel like they're getting close to the Ganga, they turn around and swim back towards the Jamuna. And he said, if you take, and Srila Prabhupada's right there listening to everything. And so we knew if Srila Prabhupada said, no, that's not true, or he didn't say anything, it was like, oh, these are real pastimes. Interchange between them, to see the friendly interchange was just really lovely, because we had only seen Srila Prabhupada in settings with his disciples, where he was like a lion on the Vyasasan preaching to his disciples, but now he was in this completely different mood, relaxed with a friend. It was really sweet. And Bhagaji told us that each grain of sand, if you look under an atomic microscope, it would say, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. And he said if you looked at the bones of the Vaishnavas, if you actually, every microbe, every atom, every cell in there would say, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. That the entire atmosphere of Raj was surcharged with the holy name of the Lord.
In 1969, after many false starts at trying to get a temple in Los Angeles, Prabhupada, we were meeting in garages where we would set up in the garage, have kirtan there, and then go. We had no temple at all. We got Prabhupada an apartment on Hayworth Street, which is up sort of near Cantor's Deli near Fairfax area, Fairfax district. So he had a nice apartment, very pleasant, upstairs. And during that time is when the first Gita came out, the one that was edited by Ray Rama. And there were some questions about it. And Prabhupada had been in correspondence with Hayagriva, who was living in New Vrindavan. And Hayagriva had mentioned something about thinking he might want to get married. And Prabhupada had told him, well, you're 27, better to get married before 30 if you're going to get married, because after 30, marriage is not so pleasurable to get married after 30. And so that was pretty much the end of it. And then he called Hayagriva to come from New Vrindavan. His traveling at that expense, etc., was sort of a big thing because we had no money. Hayagriva showed up, and we were to talk about the Gita and various other subjects. So we were all upstairs in Hayworth Street. I was also there. A few of us, maybe 8 of us, were sitting. Prabhupada was sitting. We were all sitting next to Prabhupada in a row. And Dasi, who was one of the early devotees from San Francisco, very marvelous, somewhat eccentric, charming lady. Unfortunately, she passed away a year ago at Rath Yatra. But she's a very charming, eccentric lady, but very devoted. She was typing out the Nectar of Devotion. So if you read the Nectar of Devotion, she typed it, transcribed it. I used to read over her shoulder while she was transcribing before it even was published. Well, anyhow, she was there, and she was a really good cook. And so she was cooking. So we were thinking, how nice Shamadasi's cooked for us here. And Prabhupada is tasting and relishing. We're all tasting and relishing very nice subjis. And Prabhupada turns to Hayagriva and says, pointedly but somewhat offhand, well, do you like the prasadam? And Hayagriva is a very intense guy, very quiet. If you read his books like Vrindavan Days or the Hare Krishna Explosion, you see a panoramic, full-color view of Hayagriva. But meeting him, he wasn't like that at all. He just would sit time and talk rather rough, And he said, yeah, it's good, yes. So Prabhupada looked at him and smiled urbanely and said, being a good cook, being able to cook nicely, he said, is the first qualification of a wife. And Hayagriva nearly started choking on his food, staring at Shamadasi. Shamadasi's hands were trembling. He nearly dropped the pot of prasadam. I was sitting there with my mouth open, as was everybody else. Everyone was staring at Srila Prabhupada. And all of a sudden it dawned on us that not only this was a bombshell that had just been dropped, including them, had any inkling of it. So that was there, and Hayagriva gradually recovered his composure. Shamadasi was blushing through her gopi makeup, and everybody was totally astonished. But Prabhupada said, the first qualification of a wife is that she can cook nicely. So from that point onward, I began to realize that the home art of cooking is the key to Krishna consciousness, life, family life, etc. A woman who is a devotee and pulls out frozen dinners made by Stoffers is not quite spreading the movement in a way in which will be remembered by her grandchildren.
There was one time at 26 Second Avenue, Srila Prabhupada was in his quarters, and my husband went in there, Advaita Das went in, and he said, Srila Prabhupada, sometimes I think I love my wife and I love my daughter. What is that? And Srila Prabhupada explained that one hand cannot love the other hand. It has to go through the stomach. The food has to go through the stomach. So one person cannot love another person without having Krishna as a center.
I had a personal question with Srila Prabhupada regarding my situation later on because my husband had taken a second wife. And there was a social experiment at the time with co-wifery, or there was some interest in it. And my first husband, he took a second wife, and I didn't really understand how I was supposed to act in regard to the situation. It was confusing to me, and I had no social reference for it. I had no example to follow. So I asked, I was talking to Jaya Prabhu, and he was Prabhupada, and he said, he insisted that I write and speak with Srila Prabhupada about my concerns. And so he hand-delivered my letter. It was for me to be able to speak my concerns. I was unable to. You know, I needed to write it. I was too shy and too much in awe of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada wrote back a letter, and I was really surprised because I was expecting some kind of etiquette instruction of how to act because of needing instruction on the matter. And Srila Prabhupada, he gave very, just like the instruction that he gave for everything, he said, as far as you're concerned, he said, our instructions are, it's not about marriage. That's not what it's about. He said that I have given all of my disciples instructions on how to advance in Krishna consciousness, and if they can't follow, then what can I do? He said, but as far as you're concerned, associate with devotees and increase your hearing and chanting. So it was like, I thought he was going to tell me how I should function in this situation, and he advised me to not associate with my husband in this letter. He said, just don't associate. And that was surprising to me because I was a young girl with a child, and I you know, my parents are still married, so I didn't really believe in divorce. Srila Prabhupada never said the word divorce, ever, not once. He just said, don't associate with your husband. So I took it to heart, and I separated myself from the situation geographically. Not emotionally, because I wasn't really, you know, qualified. I was attached to the concept of marriage. You know, that was the thing. But to follow in Srila Prabhupada's instructions, but even if it wasn't completely from the pure devotional platform, that I needed to do that.
One time in a letter I wrote to Prabhupada, basically I was pretty obsessed with sex life early on in my life. And I had an honest question which I wanted to ask, but it was very embarrassing. And I was wondering, you know, looking at Krishna and trying to understand Krishna, I was wondering, well, did Krishna, because we see his picture, we see his body, and so I was really wondering, but I thought, wow, that is a really embarrassing thing to think about. But I thought that, well, I had to get this off my chest because I was just inquisitive. I was always very inquisitive. Prabhupada one time thanked me for my inquisitiveness in a letter, which I had filled, probably a letter that filled with 10 questions, bing, one after another. So I wrote a letter to Prabhupada, and I asked him, I asked him, please forgive me for this outrageous question, but I asked him, does Krishna have genitals? And he wrote back a letter and said that, he said, no, it's not an outrageous question. Any sincere question is welcome. He said, and you should know it, that yes, Krishna has genitals. If we have got genitals, then Krishna has got genitals, but his genitals are not like ours. he does not need his genital to impregnate. He can impregnate with any part of his body. He can impregnate with his eyes and so on. He said, but he was explaining that as a we should be starting from the feet of Krishna and not go up, just like we also start from the beginning of the Bhagavatam, which is the feet of Krishna, and we don't go on until we've progressed. So it was just as a result of trying to understand something more than I was actually qualified to understand.
When I was pregnant with my daughter, I was constipated. And I asked Srila Prabhupada's servant Govinda Dasi, what should I do about constipation? I figured she would know since she was with Srila Prabhupada so much. She said, go ask Srila Prabhupada. So I was a little mortified to go ask Srila Prabhupada something so mundane. But I went into his room, I bowed down, and I kneeled before him and I said, Srila Prabhupada, what should I do about constipation? Srila Prabhupada said, drink milk, drink more milk. So I was very happy to receive this instruction. Srila Prabhupada had previously told us not to drink cold milk, that cold milk gives indigestion, so I knew he meant to drink warm or hot milk. And that anything I ever needed to know, Srila Prabhupada would know the answer to.
Prabhupada lecturing at the Brahma Samaj in Nairobi. This is all in Nairobi in Kenya. And President Kenyatta, by the way, from our preaching activity there, that time, that visit, said that it had overcome the overthrow of the Indians, as they called them, Asians, to be sent back to India or elsewhere, the way it had happened in Uganda, when Idi Amin had thrown out all the Asians, like thousands of them, and took their property, just to let them leave with what they had in their suitcases, like Jews being sent to relocation camps. That that was on the verge of happening, and Prabhupada saved the whole situation for the Hindus. And that was how it was saved, at his ferocious preaching and crushing of demigod worship. So anyhow, we're in the man's house, etc. Later on at the Brahma Samaj, we had a big mela there, and Prabhupada is sitting, and everyone is sitting there. And Prabhupada has his disciples speaking, and everybody's trashing everybody, all the Indians, telling them why you have given up your culture, etc. Shama Sundar, Brahmana, everybody. I didn't speak, but everybody's speaking. Then Prabhupada speaks, and he starts talking, and he ends with this. I mean, whatever he said, it ended with this. He said, Durga, he said, is riding on a tiger, and she has got 8 arms. In each of these arms, he said, there is a weapon. He said, one of these weapons, he said, is a trident. It has got 3 prongs, he said. And what are these 3 prongs? He said, it is the threefold miseries, Adidevik, Adibhoshik, Adiatvik. He said, and what is she doing with that trident? He said, staring at them. He said, she is stabbing demons. He went like that. She is stabbing demons. Then he pulls himself up. And who are those demons? He cried out. He looks at the group, there are like 1,500 people in the room. He said, we are those demons. Whoever is suffering from the threefold miseries, is being stabbed by the trident of Durga. Then he looked and his lip curled with utter disdain, and he worded like that with his hand. He said, and they are worshiping. So that is how he crushed Durga worship in Africa, and created a big base for real Vaishnava preaching without compromise. And that led to another series of events which saved all those Durga worshipping Indians, their handbags, back to India or some other country, England or wherever, and be rejected. So Prabhupada saved everyone, even though the people in the room were absolutely stricken. They were in convulsions, literally, because of Prabhupada's intense words. But like the doctor may sometimes, even without anesthetic, cut away something in the body that is terribly injurious, and the person may scream. Later, the patient becomes better, and leaving that cancer there, the patient would die. So better to suffer the pain even without anesthetic now. And then that's what I got from that. It was very, very, not to mince words, even if there was something at risk, like being left in Africa without a way to leave and antagonizing all of your friends that are helping you. So all these people that are handing Gitas to President so-and-so or Cardinal so-and-so, they should think, far more better to challenge Cardinal so-and-so than to hand him a Gita and pose with him with the Gita. He may hand it to his, get rid of this thing, later. Better not to get posed with it, better to preach from it, and then let the chips fall where they may. That's what Prabhupada did, and we are his disciples.
And it was the last time I saw Prabhupada personally that I had this idea. I wanted to study Jyotish, astrology. And I asked Prabhupada, could I study Jyotish? And Prabhupada said, it's not very important. He said it's not such an important thing, and he really didn't give it much thought at all. You know, it was like sort of, like that. It's not very important. So I was crestfallen because I thought this was a great thing that I could use this and talk about Krishna consciousness, because Jyotish is very exacting. I mean, if you are good, with understanding the astronomical positions, you can tell a person almost everything about their life, so they become very respectful of you. I got to ask him again a few days later, when I got to bring him his lunch. And I asked Prabhupada, and I said, I had this idea that I know you said it was not very important, but I had this idea that I could preach if I learned about Jyotish. And all of a sudden, Prabhupada's eyes lit up. It got bigger, it seemed. And he said, oh, for preaching? Then it is all right. And I smiled. Thank you, Srila Prabhupada. And I was just, so happy because I thought, that because the devotees had actually told me it was nonsense, that I shouldn't study astrology, that this is nonsense, and that this is not. And Prabhupada very simply stated so that gave me, so since then, I mean, little by little, I started to study and found teachers in India and also in the U.S., and so gained some teeny little minute understanding of it. And it has allowed us to preach. If it wasn't for my studying Jyotish and for my wife studying Ayurveda and healing modalities, we wouldn't be able to preach like this. So it's wonderful because I feel that he actually gave me a window. He actually gave me a window that, yes, for preaching. And so what else can I say?
Just 2 weeks old, and we did go on a morning walk. This was in the very end of '73, and he was bundled in a big blanket because it was December and he was 2 weeks old. And so Srila Prabhupada said to me, when on the walk, he saw the bundle and he said, can he walk? And I said, no, Srila Prabhupada. And he said, if he can walk, he should walk. And I never understood how prophetic that and deep and difficult that instruction would be for me, because I have a tendency to spoil loved ones. Srila Prabhupada obviously knew that, because it's been an instruction that I've had a really hard time following. And 25, 30 years later, I understand the intensity and the import of that instruction and how Srila Prabhupada predicted my problems. It was really amazing, really amazing.
I asked Srila Prabhupada, what did Krishna call Mother Yashoda? And Srila Prabhupada said, Mother.
One time I made a big mistake. A lot of rice, which of course was clean in the pot from the lunch prasadam from the devotees, and we had some dal that was also clean, but it was from lunch. And I decided to put them together and make it into a kitri to distribute in the evening. When Prabhupada found out, he called me into his room, and he was very upset. He said to me, rice should never be reheated. Who did that? And I said, I did that, Srila Prabhupada. He said, that was a big mistake. He said, you should not rice. And I said, I'm sorry, Srila Prabhupada. But just as easy as Prabhupada would get angry, his compassion was also so great that, when he saw that you could take the punishment, at least in my case, his anger subsided.
The first day I oversalted, and the next morning while Srila Prabhupada was giving class, I got to be used as an example on how over-endeavor is just like oversalting the food. Oh my goodness, I cringed. It was like I shrunk down. And the word came down, no salt. No salt. Srila Prabhupada said, you make everything just like you're making, but no salt. He said, I will add. I know how to add just the right amount. For you, no salt. Oh my goodness, I thought I would just die. I thought I would just die. And then in class the next morning, I became small, very, very, very small. And there was another part of me that was sort of overjoyed because then I could understand what over-endeavor was like. I never really understood what that was because I was so enthusiastic and fairly fanatic, and you know, we were all pretty fanatic at that point, but Srila Prabhupada was trying to make a point here, and he made it so well by using, and anything that would happen during the day became food for instruction for us, and he would utilize that to instruct everyone. So even though it was really painful and very difficult, at this point in time I feel very overjoyed that, and it is something I will never ever forget.
So then we, you know, the initiates were, we were chosen. I was going to get a Brahminical initiation in Boston. We went there. It was a few of us, and probably anywhere from 4 or 6 people were getting initiation. We were sitting around the fire, and there happened to be this professor there. There was seemed to be always some professor who was somewhat favorable and was trying to be cultivated one way or another. And he was some professor of Sanskrit or Indology in some fashion, and he was there sitting behind us around the fire, and the grains were being passed around, and I thought to be a nice boy, and when it came around, I asked him, I passed the plate to get him to throw, and I thought that's what was being done at the time. Everybody was throwing grains in, whether they were being initiated or not. I think that's what was happening at that time. And so, to be polite, I turned around, offered him some grains, and he looked at me. Boy, it felt like a thunderbolt. It felt like a thunderbolt. What are you doing? Don't do that. You know, I don't remember what he said, but it was clear. That was it was a thunderbolt. So the grains were getting passed around, and it came around again to me, or around my area, and he motioned for somebody, either me or somebody else, to go offer the grains to this professor to throw in. So, I mean, I see the look on your face, and that was the look on my face. What is this about? I had no idea. I kept on questioning year after year. I would wonder, what happened there? And I don't, to this day it's a matter of interpretation. My guess was that this person was really Prabhupada's equal, not my equal. I was just a minor little brahmachari, way out of the league of this man, at least etiquette-wise. And Prabhupada wasn't, and so if it was to be done, Prabhupada, not by me.
In the Boston temple, it was nearing the either appearance or disappearance of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. And Satsrupa Maharaj, who was the temple president, he asked all the devotees to write a poem or a little essay about Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. So we all did that, and he sent it to Srila Prabhupada, who was in Los Angeles at the time, and he asked that all these poems and everything be read in the temple room. He said, I have nothing to offer my Guru Maharaj except these prayers from my disciples. And later he asked that they be published in the back.
In the early days of the movement, I heard Srila Prabhupada say to us that Lord Chaitanya has created this movement. It is Lord Chaitanya's movement. You may think that you are conducting this movement and that what you're doing is important for conducting it. He said, but actually, even if you did do nothing and you should not choose to take part in this movement will go on. Because this movement is being conducted by Lord Chaitanya. He said, but if you take part in it, then you can take the credit, he said, smiling. So thinking along those lines, I'd been listening to Prabhupada in Bombay, and this is again in 1972, Juhu Beach. And just when we come up Juhu Beach to where the main land is and the roads and whatnot, there's, as usual on the beach, a bit of rocky area that you climb through. So just before we got to that, Prabhupada had been talking about the people becoming, 10% becoming Krishna conscious in the age of Kali. And more recently, I've had some time to contemplate the exact mechanism of Daiva Varnashram and how that will actually take place with the Krishna consciousness movement providing the Brahminical head to this Daiva Varnashram, etc. However, as he was talking, I was thinking of that 10%, and I was also thinking, well, it will already happen. It is predicted in Shastra, but if we take part, credit. I was thinking like that. So I said to Srila Prabhupada, I said, well, Srila Prabhupada, you've just said that 10% of the population will take part in this Krishna consciousness movement. That will make it probably the greatest religion the world has ever seen since Vedic times, certainly in Kali Yuga. Huge, billions of people. And I said, since you are saying that, I said, but it's predicted in Shastra, 10%. I said, so why are we preaching if 10% are going to become Krishna conscious anyhow? Prabhupada was walking with his cane, and the cane had a little bit of piece at the top, so he put his finger on it like that. Along, he would be walking like that with his cane. All of a sudden, he whirled towards me, and he pointed his finger at me. The cane is going down, and his finger is going across the little bit that goes on the handle, and he points at me, and he looks at me totally intensely, vividly intensely, and he cries out, automatically, he said, 10% will become Krishna conscious. Then he looked at me more intensely. He said, but if you preach, why not 100%? And that's where I began to understand the difference between manifest destiny and free will. By manifest destiny, meaning Krishna's will, 10% will automatically become Krishna conscious. But if we choose, as Vasudeva says, I will not go back to Godhead until every being has gone back to Godhead. And so Prahlad Maharaj also said. I said, if we choose to preach, not me, everyone, or you, everyone, whoever wants preaching, why not 100%? And that I got was actually the mood of Thakur Bhaktivinoda. Prabhupada at one time said, he could have made everyone Krishna conscious, but he wanted to do. The Kalyana Kalpataru poem, he says, I've ripped up this tree and I brought it from Krishna Loka and I planted it. It's the choicest desire tree. But by my rough embrace, by rough handling, it is now doing poorly because I jammed it in the ground. Said, so I want everyone to come and water this tree. And if you water it, it will come back to its former glory, even though I have not handled it so nicely myself. So that mood of the Thakur Bhaktivinoda is that why not 100%? Let everyone come. Now, 3 people come and water the tree, that's nice. But if everyone comes, why not everyone? Why not 100%?
One time I brought my father to see Srila Prabhupada. Now, my father used to live in Beverly Hills at the time. He was conducting an orchestra for the Los Angeles Metropolitan Opera Company. He was a big man. He had been a medical doctor and so on and so forth. So he was a little puffed up, always looking down on a lot of people, especially on me and the devotees. He was always thinking that we were just hippies. So when I invited him to come see Srila Prabhupada, it was the old temple room. So when my father came, having to take his shoes off, he was, dressed in a very nice suit, very elegantly, and he was, well, what is this, And then the devotees were singing, and I told my father, look, that's the Maha Mantra. Sing with us, chant with us, and my father wouldn't do that. And all of a sudden, the doors to Prabhupada's quarters open up, and Prabhupada walks in with his cane, very elegantly, at the same time very simply. And all the devotees just immediately pay obeisances, bow down to pay obeisances to Prabhupada. And this very puffed up man, very arrogant, very proud, when he saw Srila Prabhupada, he couldn't help. He bowed down all the way to the floor and paid his obeisances. And Srila Prabhupada passed right next to us. I didn't know Prabhupada was leaving that morning, so I didn't have the chance to actually introduce my father to Prabhupada. He would have liked that. My father would have liked that, and I know he would have appreciated it as well, because he was an educated man, my father. So Prabhupada passed right next to us. He stopped for a second. He looked at both of us. He could see the resemblance. I looked just like my father. He just gave us this beautiful smile, full of compassion, full of love, and carried on. Needless to say, my father was totally changed after that. Although he didn't become a devotee, he did write something very nice about Srila Prabhupada. And I used to ask my father, what made you pay your obeisances to Prabhupada, even any of these things? My Prabhupada said to me, he said, he commanded that respect. He said he was not an ordinary person. He was someone very special, someone in the mood of goodness. Those were my father's words.
But Srila Prabhupada, how he saved in this particular instance was Rameshwar Maharaj. He saw that we had this first-class coupe right next to Srila Prabhupada. And he saw there were so many sannyasis, very important devotees there. And who are we? Just two women and a child. And so he was saying, we think that their space would be better occupied by some of these more important devotees. Two women and a child, how important are they? And Srila Prabhupada said, no. How will they, they will be stranded. There will be no way they can get out. It won't be right. We came with them and we are leaving with them. We were so grateful. We were so grateful. And also, this Mr. Gupta, the train master, we were cooking for ourselves, so he would have cow's milk brought in. He had things brought special for Srila Prabhupada, and he made sure we got some of that too, because he saw that we were cooking for ourselves. And that was all Srila Prabhupada's arrangement. It was all Srila Prabhupada's mercy.
In the early days in New York City, as everyone knows, it gets very hot there and humid. And devotees would sometimes go without their shirts, or I'd like to go without my shirt. And I knew there was some vanity involved in that. So I was trying to be a good devotee. And I asked Prabhupada, is it all right to go without a shirt? Thinking from the vain point of view that maybe that's not proper. And he said, well, he didn't answer it, and that had nothing to do with that. He said, no, you should not put yourself at the mercy of the sun. That was very interesting. This is way back in 1967, 68, when there wasn't really that kind of knowledge about how detrimental the sun was, but Prabhupada said like that.
Boston, Srila Prabhupada had a pocket watch on the table in front of him. And after the engagement, he took the watch and he very gently placed it in his bead bag. And I could just see that everything Srila Prabhupada touched, he was seeing that it belonged to Krishna. He didn't just pick it up and throw it in his bead bag. He held it as an object that belonged to Krishna.
There was this amazing incident that took place on the beach at Jagannath Puri. Srila Prabhupada had been extended an invitation to come. There was a book dedication event that was taking place. Pandal put up, and there very dark-skinned sort of moti or, large Brahmin fellow who had written a book. And Srila Prabhupada, what had just happened was because Govinda Dasi tried to go in and see the deities, and it erupted into such a dreadful mishap. She had this concept that she was going to pretend she was an old lady, and she had a cane, and she had a big chadar. She was accustomed to wearing big chadars all the time to keep warm because she was always cold. So as it was evening, in the evening arctic, to go into the temple with this cane, walking in with the cane. She had very big shoulders though, so, and she was all covered up, but they spotted her and they ripped the chadar off and they grabbed her cane and started beating her with the cane, and she came running out. I was out waiting for her. I didn't feel that brave. I was always happy to see Patita Pavana at the steps, and I was thinking of the mood of Haridas Thakur and who was I to go in to see the deity. And as soon as this happened, we rushed to see Srila Prabhupada. I mean, she was really, really upset. It really, it really, really upset her. And so we both went and dandavats to Srila Prabhupada, and she's explaining in great emotion how I've just been beaten by the chokidars at the temple, and I can't believe this has happened, Srila Prabhupada. And his eyebrows went up. Oh, he was really, really disturbed, really upset about it. He was visibly moved. He was visibly moved at Govinda Dasi's plight. And I was just quietly just taking it all in, just seeing their relationship, just so sweet, like a father concerned for his daughter. And she was so emotional about it. But it wasn't over. Srila Prabhupada wasn't finished. I mean, he saw this was a problem. It had become extremely apparent. There was a problem here. So the next day, when Srila Prabhupada accepted this invitation to this book dedication, when he arrived with sannyasis, a great entourage of devotees that flanked him. And we came in, it was like this beautiful Srila Prabhupada as he floated in. And the Panda, who was, like I said, he was a thicker, dark fellow, he handed the book to Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada accepted the book, and he put it to his head. And he said, I have not read it, and handed it back to the Panda. And he immediately began to launch in to this incredibly merciful monologue to them. He said, Jagannath is Jagannath. He is not a Risanath. He is not. His devotees will be coming to visit Jagannath from all over the world. Why you're not letting in his devotees? Why you're not allowing his devotees who are coming from all over this world? Why you're not allowing them to come and get darshan? This is not good. He said, this is not good. They must be allowed to come in and get darshan of their Lord. He said, if you do not let them in, Lord Jagannath will pack his bags and he will come to live with us.
April 28th, Srila Prabhupada was in New York, and he installed the first Radha Krishna deities, and he installed Lord Jagannath, Srimati Subhadra, and Lord Baladev, and he initiated some devotees and married some devotees. And there was a tape that is no longer in existence, so I'm going to read some of the transcription that I had at the time. So Srila Prabhupada was marrying me to Advaita, and my mother first said, Srila Prabhupada told her what to say. He said, my girl was so long under my guidance, now I entrust this girl under your guidance. And Advaita said, I accept this girl for life. And Balai, I accept you as my husband to serve you throughout my whole life. Then Srila Prabhupada said, you are promising before Radha and Krishna, so you must take this responsibility. I speak to the husbands especially. According to Vedic principles, a woman is always to be given protection. They have no freedom. Women are like children. If you give freedom to a child, it means death to them. They are tender, feeble, and weak. People will exploit them. So long as a girl is young, she is under the protection of her parents. In India, girls don't mix with boys. Then she is handed over to take charge of her. In old age, the husband leaves home and takes sannyas. There is no question of divorce or separation. If there is any misunderstanding between husband and wife, it should be neglected, not taken seriously. Just like if there is fighting between two ghosts, it should not be taken seriously. They cannot hurt each other. If there is thunder sound in the sky in the morning, it should not be taken seriously. There is no rain. Nobody should go to court. This is a misuse of understanding. No question of divorce. It is you're promising before the Supreme Lord Krishna. If you break this promise, there will be serious reaction. I am very happy. As a sannyasi, I am not to perform marriage ceremonies, but for the benefit of my disciples, I am doing it. Please remember your responsibility and be happy and chant Hare Krishna. There is no need of abstinence, but don't beget children like cats and dogs. A person in Krishna consciousness must be serious about his position. If you can produce children in Krishna consciousness, then you may have hundreds of children, otherwise no children. So this, Srila Prabhupada married us in person and initiated us and just gave so many wonderful instructions that hopefully we can follow.
But we'd go out on morning walks with Srila Prabhupada, and the most convenient place was right near the British Museum in a park called Great Russell Square. I went there about 8 years ago, and I saw it had fallen into great disrepair. But at that time, it was beautiful. It was a walk with benches all around it, with a fountain and pond in the middle, and beautiful plantings. The British are very fond of nice gardening. So we'd go there and chant japa and go around. And in that course of time, Prabhupada would always, on the morning walk, bring up. So as we were walking all around, Srila Prabhupada noticed that there were young men sleeping on the bench, long-haired hippies, not bathed, etc. He is pointing out, he said, just as in your country, there are these young men are sleeping out of doors like this. He said, why are they leaving there? Many of them are from good families, from good homes. And when I'd not been to India or anything, but when I did go to India, I saw that a good home means you don't go out and sleep on a bench. It's like a great space of sanctity. But yet, so he saw, and everyone has got their more or less hippie answer to the question. Well, Srila Prabhupada, they have rejected materialism. Families are materialistic. That's why they're sleeping. Prabhupada said no. He said, oh, Srila Prabhupada, they're protesting against politics. No. Oh, Srila Prabhupada, they're trying to become sadhus, but they do not know how, like us, but they do not know. No. One thing after the other, he said to it. They said, Narayan, I did not know. I thought of everything, and I didn't even bother trying to say something because I couldn't even get close. So finally, we're going around to see this should be easy. A bunch of people that are basically our generation, a couple of years before, they're sleeping on a bench in the 1971. Why is this a tough question? We're pondering, and then finally everybody just gives up. We're all completely flummoxed, and we say to Srila Prabhupada, well, why then? And Srila Prabhupada looks and he said, they think they have rebelled. They have left and they've rejected their family's values. But actually, they had the karma to be born in a nice family. But then they have lost that karma and Krishna has kicked them out. They are thinking that anytime they can go back, but actually they cannot. They have been kicked out by Krishna. So there's no benefit there. And from that I gathered, Maya always tries to convince us that what is happening to us is exactly the way things are supposed to be. If we have a bad divorce or somebody gets killed, we have so many ways of adjusting it so it sounds okay. And I personally have talked with homeless people. I said, why don't you get on SSI? You're entitled, you can do this, you can do that. And they give me the most elaborate reasons why they have to be starving, hungry, and filthy in the street rather than getting an apartment and having SSI, And there's so many devotees are in SSI living nicely. He said, they could do, and they cannot because they've figured it out. Maya has convinced them. That Maya They are punished by Krishna. They're kicked out by Krishna. But in the Gita it says Krishna their intelligence is stolen by illusion. They think they are rebelling, but the rebellion actually is that Krishna kicked them out, and they think they're rebelling, and that thinking that they are doing it keeps them out. And they are making no amends how to rectify the situation.
Srila Prabhupada wanted my sister to finish high school. He didn't want her to just quit school and become a devotee. He said my students should be educated. He didn't want them to just give up all their but instead dovetail them for Krishna, become devotees, but still go to high school.
The one thing about Srila Prabhupada, he was really kind to the children, incredibly kind to the children. On a subsequent journey, I had my son, and by the time he could walk, he was wearing the little slip-on dhotis, and he had these cute little outfits, and he would just chant and dance so nicely for Srila Prabhupada. And 3 times Srila Prabhupada said that he was a dancer in a previous life. He said he was a great devotee, a big devotee. But 3 times he mentioned about dancing, and 3 times he mentioned devotion. And they had this incredible rasa between the two of them. Every day Atmarama would give him a garland, and every single day Srila Prabhupada would take one of his garlands off and garland him. It was just so beautiful. And one thing that really I remember with great joy, because every service that I ever did, I think the service that was the most satisfying to me was seeing the pleasure that Srila Prabhupada took in our children, his second generation. I mean, it was just magnificent. I felt as a mother extremely satisfied. And Srila Prabhupada, he was, as he was taking Charnamrita and paying obeisances, he sprinkled his wash water on my son's head. And at that moment, my entire life, it was the success of my existence, and the sunam bonum of any service that I might ever have performed to my spiritual master. These children are so important, and Srila Prabhupada made it very clear how important this child seva was, and still is. It's glorious.
Really impressed me. One thing that really impressed me, Prabhupada got a stroke early on, just not too long after I joined, and I wonder what that was. But anyway, he got a stroke in early '67 or early to mid '67. And then he went out to, he was in the hospital in Manhattan. Devotees just didn't know what to do. Everybody was certainly very scared. In the hospital, and we would go occasionally, and Kirtananda was taking care of him at that time. Devotees would go occasionally. I went one time, and Prabhupada's one side of his body was paralyzed, so his lip was drooping on that side, and arm was paralyzed, and so he was having devotees massage that side of his body. I got a chance to massage his arm, and they were feeding him there vegetarian food, but they were feeding him just boiled vegetables, steamed or boiled vegetables, and he really didn't. And he would try to spice it up with some salt and pepper, but really didn't. He wasn't satisfied. One time he gave it to us. He gave it, and so after, but he didn't, so he didn't like it there. He eventually, I believe that Brahmananda at one point snuck him out because they didn't want him to leave, and Brahmananda just, got him out of the hospital there, and then he came back and he went to recuperate on the West Coast. That was the arrangement, and he came back, and very way back to India. So he was recuperating a little bit, but eventually was going to go back to India, which was very scary because we didn't know if we were going to see him again. And he came into the temple. I remember he came into the temple, and he was very weak, walking with a cane, walking very slowly. And he came in to the temple, walked up to a picture of, we had the disciplic succession pictures up, his spiritual master Bhakti, and also then Bhakti Vinod Thakur, and maybe Gorkashore Das Babaji Maharaj. So he walked up to the picture of his, slowly got down on his knees and down to full dandavats. This is when he was just, it was just very impressive to see the kind of devotion that he had, even while he was so sick.
Srila Prabhupada asked us to always pray that he'd be able to stay on the planet until he finished his Srimad Bhagavatam. And one time I wrote Srila Prabhupada a letter saying, Srila Prabhupada, I'm always praying that you stay on this planet until you have finished your Srimad Bhagavatam. He said, you should pray to Krishna that I stay until I finish all of my books. He wanted to always spread Krishna consciousness. I guess that's my big impression of Srila Prabhupada, is that his whole life was just spreading Krishna consciousness for Krishna, for his spiritual master, for Lord Chaitanya. Didn't care for himself the way people are absorbed in themselves, but just wanted to get the word out, chant Hare Krishna and go back to Godhead, get out of this material world. Let me finish my books.
For me, the quality in Srila Prabhupada that stood out more than anything at the time was his humility. Because it seemed I'd never met someone so great before. I had never met someone that with such energy that beamed like he did before. You were in Prabhupada's presence and you seemed like you were in the presence of a giant. But in actual stature, Prabhupada was barely 5 feet and a few inches tall. But he was so powerful, he was so full of chi at his age. But he was so humble. That was the and I remember him saying so many times that is the first quality. That if you have not humility, then how can you possibly expect to make any advancement in spiritual life? So that was it for me, is that every other person that I had met that was a guru, that was a so-called spiritual leader, wanted you to know that. And all he wanted you to know was, please chant Hare Krishna. That's all he asked. He didn't ask for any worship. He didn't say, remember my name. You didn't see his name up in lights anywhere. All he said was, please chant Hare Krishna. So I owe Srila Prabhupada my whole existence, my everything.
I think what really impressed me about Prabhupada was his infallibility. From early on, I mean, really, when I first met Prabhupada and he came to New York and they were arranging engagements for Prabhupada to speak, before I could even ask really intelligent questions, I would hear questions, challenging questions from people, and I would think, uh-oh, wow, is he going to be able? And sure enough, Prabhupada answered. I've never seen Prabhupada defeated, ever.
I remember this one lady, she raised her hand after Prabhupada had finished the Bhagavad Gita class, and she had a question. And she said, in the Bhagavad Gita it is said that if one thinks of Krishna at the time of death, one will go to Krishna. Now my question is, what if I think of you at the time of death? Will it have the same effect? So Prabhupada didn't answer right away. He sort of closed his eyes and he was thinking for like maybe 2 seconds, and then he smiled very nicely and he said, that is very nice. He said, yes, it will have the same effect.
Prema Mrita